Good morning. I am kind of the purpose and what I'm intending today is to have more regular, just casual coffee talks throughout the next 6 weeks as just a way for anybody who has questions about mushroom things or is interested in just hearing a little bit more about whatever the topic that I'm kind of interested in talking about for the day happens to be. And then hopefully over the coming weeks, I can do a little bit more prep in talking about some of the weather or the regions that I think are going to be, especially active as we get into the later part of this month and especially into October. Pretty much everywhere is active, but then we might spend a little bit more time looking at different regions and what happens to be fruiting in those areas. Something that I had recently read from one of the books that I'm working on is that even with a lot of time spent, like learning about mushrooms, even some of these taxonomists would still be surprised by what they're finding out in the forest. In certain areas, they may find a lot of mushrooms, and then just like right next to that, there would be nothing for acres, and it's just really hard to understand what's going on. If you have been to any of my classes, you should have heard me talk plenty about iNaturalist and just all the benefits that we can get from playing with iNaturalist. But one of the things that I intend to do, or that I'm trying to do, is as I'm walking through the forest, I pretty much take pictures of nearly every mushroom that I see, for the most part, until I've seen maybe 20 of the same thing, or if they're a little bit too rotten, or I don't find anything interesting about it, which is pretty rare. But for some of the really small mushrooms, little brown mushrooms, I don't find particularly interesting. But what I do try to do is take as many pictures as I can, or pictures of as many mushrooms as I can. That way, over time, we can just build a better database or bank of information about what mushrooms are fruiting in particular areas. And that's going to be a little bit different than if I was only taking pictures of, say, the chanterelles and chicken of the woods. So that's why I take loads of photos when I'm out there, and I'm hopeful that just over time we can start to take some of the mystery out of where things are fruiting and why. So I will, keep an eye on chat, and I am, totally open for you all just jumping in and asking some questions if you have any in particular. But I can get started. I'll keep an eye on chat just in case you do have anything you'd like to chat about. But some of the things that I wanted to talk about today were I'm going to pull up just some of the air quality forecasting rain over the last 72 hours around the state. I'm in Washington, and so I'll be focusing on Washington right now, but it will be an easy thing to do for, say, Oregon and Washington, even BC. So I'll show you a little bit about how I'm making decisions on where to go. I will zoom in a bit more on the maps just to show you specifically some areas that I think I would visit this weekend. I have some ideas in mind for myself already. Mostly I'm just following some clean air, but we do have lots of rain in the forecast, and that means that we should have some pretty good fruitings coming up just in the next week. So I'm going to move over to Tableau for a minute to show you some things there. Let me share my screen. This is my first go at this, so it's not going to be as clean as it could be, but we'll get a little bit smoother over time. This is going to be small for many of you, but I am going to make it a little bit easier to look at here in just a minute. Let me remind myself how I need to do this. Just bear with me for a quick second. I think we're almost there. Okay. So I know that this is pretty small. Let me see if I can make it any bigger. I can't, but it's not terribly important. You can just get a sense for what I'm attempting to do, and I'll talk through a lot of this as well. Also, the recording of this will be available, and that will be a little bit easier for some to zoom in on. So I'm going to get back to this chart here in a moment, but I'm going to start at just a basic introduction, which is, what does mushroom season look like over, the course of the year, January through December. And hopefully you're able to see this okay. But this is something that I put together just using, iNaturalist data to show you what our seasonality looks like for mushroom fruiting here in the Pacific Northwest. And so you can see that January is a little bit higher than February or March. The reason why is January is kind of just the end of the fall season. So you can just think of this as being an extension of the fall. Then February and March, the mountains are all frozen, and low elevations were still in the 40s, 40 degrees, so not that warm. So there isn't a lot of mushroom observations and mushrooms fruiting, though you will still find them as you're walking around the city parks, or if you are out along the coastal areas or in Puget Sound in the San Juan Islands. Low elevation areas will see mushrooms year round. A lot of these observations in here, and let's just see if I can look at it for just a second. This isn't going to be super useful. I was just trying to take a look and see if I could see the species that are most common in February, March. I can show you that later, but we're in September, so we should be talking about September things. You see that there is a bump here in April and May, and that's as the mountains are warming up. More and more mushrooms are fruiting just in more areas. But then moving into June, July, and August, again, there's a pretty big lull. And I really had a hard time believing that coming into this year, that it was really that much reduced in July and August. But I've spent a fair amount of time out in the forests, and I've had some areas where I found quite a bit, but then other areas like in the Central Cascades, I wasn't seeing really much of anything in some of those summer months. So this is pretty accurate. Then moving into September, as it starts to cool, but more importantly, once the rains come, that's when we really start to see fruiting pick up, and then here in October, that's our big month, October, November, and moving down the coast into Oregon and Northern California, you'll just see this whole thing shifted further to the right, where the big season happens a little bit later, late October into November and December, as you get into California. Some of the colors here that you're looking at are just green, red, and gray. The green are mushrooms that are edible. So this is just to give you a sense for the proportion that you might be likely to see when you're out. These proportions are, they're skewed. They're skewed towards the things that people want to take photos of, and people are more likely to want to take photos of mushrooms that are edible or that they are familiar with, but still can give you an idea, a rough idea of the number of edible mushrooms that are out there compared to the number of poisonous mushrooms. That's the red. And then hallucinogenic are these, just like little orange guys, just a very thin slice in here. And it is really just one primary genus of mushrooms that are hallucinogenic, which is why we're only seeing like a tiny, tiny number. Let's see if there's anything else in here I want to show you before moving on to another chart. So this is crazy. It's tons of tiny text. You don't have to worry about the text. Many of you have already, like heard me talk about this a little bit, but I think it's really important to understand. So you don't have to worry about the text. Just pay attention to the colors and some of these small boxes that I'm looking over. So what I've done here, and I'm not sure how filtered this is, but I've split all of these iNaturalist mushroom observations into their families. So the bigger the box, the more times somebody has photographed, uploaded, and identified a mushroom that fits into either one of these, let's just say this color right here, this light blue, are in the family, the Agaricaceae, and or the agarics, the agaricus mushrooms. Within that family, there are a number of genera or individual, one genus, singular is genus. So here, and again, I'm sorry that the text is so small, but you don't even have to worry about it. I'm going to talk you through it. Here, this is the Agaricus genus, and this is another genus called Leucoagaricus. And here are the genus Chlorophyllum. That's the shaggy parasols that are, a kind of popular mushroom and edible, including one poisonous mushroom. So that's just for the, the most common of the families. But then we can look through for each of these colors getting smaller and smaller and smaller. We have, like right here, the Romarias and Turbinellus. Romaria is the coral mushrooms that you might be familiar with or might have seen. Russulas, these guys, this one right here, Russula brevipes, is the mushroom that makes the lobster mushroom. So there are a lot of different families that one will see around the Pacific Northwest. And within each of these families, there are there's multiple genera, or, a genus. And within each genus, there are individual species here. So there are loads and loads of mushrooms that are popping up. And then among these, just a fraction of them are edible. But when you look at this map with green and red, and I'm not sure if those, here are the little hallucinogenic guys down here in the psilocybe family, you can see that there are quite a lot of edible mushrooms out there. But the problem is that there are just lots and lots of all sorts of mushrooms out there. And so my goal, is to break this into smaller chunks that are easier to remember. And so over time, as part of just the fall festival, I will be doing talks on, say, just one family at a time, like the Russulas or the Amanitas up here. These are those beautiful red mushrooms with the white dots. Actually, that's right. I think one of these guys. Oh, yeah, this one right here is Amanita muscaria, red mushroom with white dots. There are other mushrooms in the same family that are also poisonous. So it's a great family to learn. So over time, I'll be just picking apart each one of these, as the weeks go on, not today, picking these apart, and just we can one by one start to learn different families, which is really the way that many of the guidebooks work, is things are grouped into these families, and it's kind of the expectation of that book, or maybe a near prerequisite, that you can find your way to that family before starting to look for a specific species, one unique mushroom. I mean, that's a lot to be taken in at 7 o'clock. So let me move on to another thing here, and this is maybe the last chart that I'm going to share with you, but this one's a lot more useful, I think. Again, very small letters, but it will be clear here in a moment. So what I've done is I've taken the edible mushrooms that you saw, the green ones on that earlier list, and I've sorted it by genus, so that the most popular genus is at the top, and or what you're most likely to see is at the top. And then each one of these bars is kind of the frequency for a particular edible mushroom. So I want to just share with you a couple of the most likely mushrooms you are to see that are edible, and talk you through a couple of these before I move on to some other stuff. So the very first genus here are the russulas. And I talk a lot about russulas, but let me share with you some photos on russulas just to start kind of setting your eye up. And since I'm going to have to change my screen share, we probably won't be back to this for a little bit. So let me just talk through a couple of these, and then I'll move on to all photos, and we can look at some more interesting things rather than bar charts. So at the top is Russula brevis. That is the short-stemmed or short-stalked russula, and it is a mushroom that is infected by another fungus that ends up making the lobster mushroom. The next most common edible russula to find, and I think it's probably misidentified a fair amount, but it's called the shrimp russula, or Russula zerampelina. And the shrimp russulas kind of somewhat easier to identify than most other russulas, because it does have a slightly shrimpy smell or fishy smell. I will share with you some photos on mushrooms that look like the Russula zerampelina, but you don't have to. Really, the best way to identify it after getting kind of a good sense for what it looks like is through smell. So I'll share with you a couple of russulas. It looks like this one right here, Coprinus comatus, in this bar, is probably the most likely or the most common edible mushroom for people to observe, see, and upload into iNaturalist. And I keep saying that because it's not, truth. This is based on sampling. So the more people there are in a city, the more likely they are to see city mushrooms. And so they're getting, things are being skewed that way. So Coprinus comatus is the shaggy mane. I'll share with you some photos on shaggy manes, but they're nearly unmistakable. They are a very, very common mushroom. So we'll get to that one. I will share with you some photos on this genus called chlorophyllum, or the shaggy parasols. These are probably among the top 20, and it could be in the top 10 mushrooms that people might be finding and harvesting. I find shaggy parasols oftentimes in city parks, and so I don't pick them, but they are a pretty easy one to identify. So I'll share with you some photos on those. The suelis here look a lot like boletes, but they have bigger, spongier pores. And so I'll share with you just one way that, or a couple of photos on the underside of these suelis, is to give you a sense for what one might look for. And I'll move through just a couple more on this list just to prepare you for it. Cantharellus, those are the chanterelles. So that is a very popular mushroom for what I've done here is just September and October mushrooms sorted by frequency. So chanterelles. The Gomphidius is another. They are edible, but not particularly tasty, so I may not even talk about them today. And Pleurotus, these are the oyster mushrooms. Lycoperdon, or these are a type of puffball. Lacaria, I am going to skip because I'm not super familiar with the genus. Boletes, probably one of the mushrooms that so many people, very much care about. Boletus edulis is a very popular one. And maybe we'll get to Agaricus augustus, a wonderful, its common name is the prince. So I'll share with you some photos there. So I'm going to use this as kind of my agenda or just kind of a task list. We'll talk through these mushrooms individually. I will not share that with you anymore, though. I'd like to share some photos with you. So give me a moment to reshare my screen so that we're looking at a browser instead. First, I want to show you the smoke forecast. This is Washington. If we have any Oregonians here or outside of Washington, please let me know. But this is just to give you a sense on what we have coming up. This is today, and here is tomorrow. So things are looking way better. And so my intent today, tonight at, I don't know, 5, 6 o'clock is to go here. And let me share with you on a map just kind of some of my places or places that I like to go. Let me need to change some things here quickly. So we're looking at the Olympic Peninsula, and looking at that this smoke map, you can see that Olympic Peninsula all the way down along the coast. This is Long Beach, southern Washington. Everything's looking good here. Pretty much the whole western, I don't know, fifth of the state is expected to be in pretty good shape today or very soon. So and one more thing I'll show you is this is rain, actual rain over the last 72 hours. And the reason why I use this 72-hour map is because mushrooms it takes them a little bit of time to grow. So after they're getting rain, it can take a couple of days, 3-4 days, for them to like really benefit from that rain. So I do use this 24 to 72 hour rainfall map to start to get ideas on where I think there are useful places to go. But just what you can see here is the whole western half of the state, and actually the western half of both states, Oregon and Washington, have had some amount of rain over the past 3 days. So as we look just down into the Olympics, where I'm thinking about going, it's much heavier here in the Central Olympics, but my intent is probably to stick up towards the northeast quadrant of the Olympics, just because it's easier for me to get to from Seattle. I'll just be probably coming over on Bainbridge or Kingston, and coming up right over here into this area. Let me see if I can pull this up quickly for you, just for one more map, and then we'll get into some photos and something a little bit less heady. If looking at maps is heady, just zooming out here for a minute so that we can get into the Olympic Peninsula. And I will show you here. You might be able to see the mild color gradient between the Olympic National Park over here. These kind of areas right here are the Buckhorn Wilderness. It's not terribly important other than it's not national park. And then you see in this top section is the Olympic National Forest. That's also somewhat visible, maybe here. It doesn't look like it on Google Maps, but this is the area that I'm targeting, kind of the whole western half of the Olympics. When I zoom in some, and the reason why I'm talking about this is to give you a sense for how do I pick my areas. I don't have specific mushroom spots that I like to go back to a lot. I still think of myself as the explorer of new mushroom spots, which is why I'm so open about where I'm going, is I don't intend on going back there necessarily in the near future. So it doesn't bother me anybody seeing what I'm exploring. I have lots of bad days. I spend hours and hours and hours out walking around forests, and it's because I just enjoy getting out in the forest and walking around. And if I happen to have good mushroom days, wonderful. If I have bad ones, that's really a bummer, but I'm still enjoying being out there. So what I'm looking for is these Forest Service roads in national forest rather than national parks. The reason why is Forest Service roads or national forest have much looser rules on automobiles, so there are more roads. They have looser rules on how many mushrooms you can collect. It's like 1 gallon per species, up to 3 species, so up to 3 gallons. But if you're just picking chanterelles in the national forest, you are allowed, at least in the Olympic National Forest, you are allowed 1 gallon of chanterelles per day. If you want to be picking more, you can. You just have to get a permit, and that permit is pretty inexpensive. But really, a gallon's a pretty good amount of mushrooms. I know that like not everybody follows these rules, and I have probably on occasion have picked over my limit before, but rarely. So these are some areas that I'm looking at, picking these Forest Service roads, especially if you just look for some of the trails. Let me get back to Gaia GPS because this will be more obvious on where some of these trails are. You look up these river valleys, you can find a lot of trails here, like whatever it looks like Gold Creek and Sleepy Hollow and some other just little red lines in here. The Lower Dungeness trailhead. These are all trails that are easy to walk. The Dungeness River and the Lower Dungeness Trail is wonderful. It's just a nice walk, and the forests are beautiful. It's a pretty low grade, and so it's pretty easy to get off of the trail and just go kind of poking around out there. But I would do the same thing off of many of these roads. As soon as and I'm just moving over to the eastern side of the Olympic Forest. This is called Leland. I don't know that Leland as a town, but there's Leland Lake over here. I can't find another good point. Oh, Quilcene is a fine kind of place to just be thinking about. But from this area, there are a number of roads that run up into the national forest. And as soon as you are actually in the national forest, you know that you're there because of the mapping that you're using, or you're just whatever, talking with me. As soon as you're in the national forest, it's okay for you just to park anywhere on the side of the road and just get out of your car and start walking around the forest there near the road so that you don't get lost, or make sure that you have some decent mapping tools on your phone, like a map cached or saved to your phone, so that if you don't have cell service, you still have good maps. Let me just drop a note in chat for you. Maps.me is a great application to have on your phone if you're going to be out of cell phone range. So take a look at that. I think it's super useful. So all of these areas, I just like 1 week ago, I was walking around, poking around. I think it was this area right here. So, around Quilcene, and I didn't find a lot. I found a lot of russulas, and I'm not super interested in russulas, but I saw a couple of small, like very small chanterelles that were just pinning, or the very young stages of them. There might have been enough rain over the last week to get them moving along a bit more, but it could take another week. So this is an area that I would suggest looking at if you are interested in getting out to the Olympics. And then for me, tonight, my interest is getting out to one of these river valleys. And it's just because there's some good trails over there that I like walking on. It does get into the national forest, but I'm not going out to do heavy amounts of picking. I'm just kind of like walking around looking at mushrooms, and if I can find a couple of handfuls to eat that night, great. But it's not terribly significant. So that's kind of where I'm going this tonight, and over probably tonight and tomorrow, I'll just be searching around these areas, and so you can be expecting an update by Sunday or Monday on actually what I am finding. let me show you a couple of other things. And just a reminder, while I can go for hours talking about any sorts of mushroom things, if you have any questions or want to, me to focus on something in particular, I'm happy to. But in the absence of that, I'm just going to keep chatting about things that I find interesting. So next, iNaturalist, a couple of things. Let me see what area I'm focusing on. What I've done here is, so from iNaturalist, the website or the web app for iNaturalist is so useful. There's a lot of really interesting things that you can find here, and all it takes is just a little bit of patience in learning how to search and how to filter, and with just some pretty a couple of small things that you learn, all of a sudden there are a lot of things that can really be opened up. So let me share with you what I've done here. What I wanted to do was find out what and where people have been finding and tagging on iNaturalist mushrooms in the last, just in September. So in the last couple of weeks, it's been dry. We haven't really had any rain. But what are people finding and where are they finding it? So you can see I've just done a search for basidiomycete fungi. That's a mouthful. The reason why I chose basidiomycete fungi is if I just started with mushroom, because that will be an easy one for you all to remember, you'll see some things that come up as options or suggestions. So I could choose fungi, including lichens, but that includes the entire fungal kingdom, and I don't really want that. There are molds and yeasts and lichens and rusts that are part of the fungal kingdom, but I don't want to see those. I want to filter them out. So I choose basidiomycete fungi, which is the first layer of filtering you can do after the kingdom of fungi. Then we have a phylum or various phyla, and one of those phyla is Basidiomycota. There are two phyla, that have mushrooms in them. One is Basidiomycete, the other is Ascomycete. I'm choosing Basidiomycete fungi because it includes mostly only mushrooms, and it removes all of the other things that I don't want to see. What I'm going to be missing out by choosing Basidiomycete fungi is that other phylum, Ascomycota, that has morels, morels and cup fungi. It's not that big of a deal to me to be filtering those out. So that's why I pretty much always choose Basidiomycete fungi here. Thanks for listening. So I have Basidiomycete fungi is the thing that I'm interested in. And then with filters, I've only added one filter, which is the date range. Normally you have date observed any, but I'm choosing a date range of September 1st of this year to the 18th. And you see that there have only been 500 observations in that time, but you can still get a sense on where people are finding mushrooms. As I zoom in here a bit, you can see from Bellingham out west that people are looking for and observing mushrooms out here. The Olympic Peninsula, many of these in here are just my observations from last weekend. In the city, of course, people are always finding mushrooms because there are lots and lots of people around. Same in Olympia. So it's not the case that Olympia has more mushrooms than Shelton. It is the case that there are more people in Olympia observing mushrooms than there are in Shelton. Mount Rainier as well. So those are just some pins. That doesn't tell us a whole lot because there are lots of mushrooms in all of these empty spaces as well. But this is just to start giving you an idea of areas that you might be able to look. And then also when I move from map view to grid view, now I can start looking at photographs of these mushrooms that people have found around Washington in just the past 2 weeks. I mentioned that we were going to talk about the shaggy mane. Here is one, that's Coprinus comatus, so one of the edible mushrooms that are very popular in the summertime, or I guess in September. They're not necessarily popular to eat. They are incredibly popular to see and to photograph. This is a good looking photograph of this mushroom. Let me just zoom in here and we can talk about it a little bit more. So you can see where it gets its name, shaggy mane. It does have this, a shaggy appearance to it. What is interesting about these mushrooms is that they are among this grouping. It's an artificial grouping of mushrooms called the ink caps. And these ink caps have a similar characteristic that gives them their name, of the tissue melting away into this black ink. It's the term is called like deliquescing or auto digesting. And so this mushroom originally had a cap that went much further down. It covered much more of this stipe, but this is a little bit older of a specimen. And so you can see that right here along the bottom, it has auto-digested into this black ink, which carries the spores, and those spores are just like falling off, as these little drips down into the ground. This is an edible mushroom, but a good time to eat it is, let's see, a good time to eat this thing is when it's still quite young. So you want to get this before that ink has started to turn at all. And I'm going to start by just sharing more photos of shaggy manes, just to give you more ways to see this. Part of learning mushrooms is just training your eyes. So let's look at some photos of shaggy manes. I'm hoping to find a nice young one so I can give you a sense for a good time. If you are really interested in eating a shaggy mane, a good time to eat these would be a bit later. This one down here, maybe a little bit, but I'd still like to find something on the left-hand side. That one, before it starts to turn at all, maybe is okay, but you want to get it as young as you can. And I'm just looking to see if I can find any others, but these are all pretty old. Yeah, okay, so some of these guys down here would be a better time. This one, I would say, is about a perfect time to harvest a shaggy mane. They can look, when they're young, when any mushroom is young, it can be easy to confuse with some other mushrooms. So a good way to make sure that you're harvesting a shaggy mane is to look around and to be able to observe that there are some older specimens around as well. So if you found this a little bit smaller and you weren't really sure and it was by itself, I would say leave it or don't consider eating it as a beginner. But if you see it growing in a little troop with some older ones and some younger ones, then that would be a safer time to choose to pick it. I have a couple of words of warning on this mushroom and just mushrooms in general. One, if you're going to eat this one, absolutely it needs to be a young specimen. It's not hasn't started to turn yet, so that's very useful. Also, shaggy manes, and I think just the ink caps in general or Coprinus, the genus in general, are known to cause some issues when consumed with alcohol. So they, some people and some books and just things that I've heard suggest that you don't eat this mushroom within 2 days of, I think, consuming alcohol. And I haven't experienced this before. I've eaten this mushroom once, just a small piece of it. But what people they can just have kind of like some reactions that'll probably mostly be cramps and gastrointestinal issues. But just know that that is a concern when eating shaggy manes. More than anything, though, I think this is just a really cool mushroom to look at, to notice, and now when you see it, at least you should recognize it. If you don't remember the name, you should remember that this is a mushroom that I have learned about before. Something else that's important to know about mushrooms, especially if you are picking mushrooms in the city or in parks, around the city or in industrial areas, is that mushrooms can, um, what am I saying? Can concentrate heavy metals. And so it's good to just be aware of the traffic, how much traffic there is around where you are picking a mushroom, or if there has historically been some industrial work around there. And also in Tacoma, there's that large plume from, I believe, the smelter that has, contaminated a lot of soil in and around the Tacoma area. And so it's worth being aware of, the condition of the ground that you're picking mushrooms. So I would avoid a lot of city mushrooms or eating many city mushrooms, but that's just a couple words of warning. So that was Coprinus comatus. We got there because I wanted to share with you what are some of the mushrooms that people are finding just around Washington in these last couple of weeks. I'm just going to scroll through here and see if there's anything else really interesting just to talk about. Here's another shaggy mane, Coprinus comatus. Here is the conifer chicken of the woods, or Laetoporus. This I do have a better, so on this map, what I've done is I've simply chosen Laetoporus, or if you didn't get there by genus, just type in chicken of the woods. And I won't even do a filter for, oh, that's interesting. It's probably the wrong chicken of the woods. I'm going to go back to Laetoporus instead, so the genus. So Laetoporus is the genus for chicken of the woods. There are a couple of different species, but they're still just chicken of the woods, which is why I'm choosing Laetoporus. So now we're just looking at a map of all of the observations on iNaturalist for chicken of the woods, or this Laetoporus genus. So I'm not filtering by date. We're just looking all around the state where chicken of the woods is popular, because as you recall, this is one of those mushrooms from those bar charts that is among the most popular or most often found edible mushrooms in this time of the year. I found a lot of these already over the last month, but those spots were deep on the Elwha River and also the Quinault River, and one other in Northeast Rainier. Maybe that was 3 weeks ago at this point. But here you can, just doing a search like this, you can zoom in and just see where is chicken of the woods found. And I'm surprised that chicken of the woods is even found just around in the city in Seattle, but I mean, I guess I shouldn't be surprised. But as I zoom in more, you can see that just around probably trailheads around Highway 2 and I-90. I know I'm being very Seattle-centric here, so let me zoom out a bit more. But in Olympia, along the coasts, people are finding chicken of the woods. And I mean, all along the coast. So pretty much all forests right now are a fine time to be finding chicken of the woods. And let me show you a few photographs of what these things can look like. So big, bright, well, they can be big, bright orange with this, nice lighter colored outer edge, light color underside. Let me see if I can find any more really good photos. So yes, chicken of the woods is a mushroom that one should be looking for when you are out walking around. I think you can just get into a forest and walk. And it's not a certainty that you're going to find it in even, say, 4 hours of walking around, but that's how mushroom hunting works until you have your own special spots and you happen to know exactly when they're going to fruit, which you probably never will. Or it's hard to know. So it is really just a crapshoot every time, and the odds get moved into our favor significantly once the rains come. So that's Laetoporus. Let me go find some of the other species that I wanted to share with you. The most popular one was that Coprinus comatus, the shaggy mane. Russula brevipes is another very common mushroom. So let me give you some photos on what Russula brevipes looks like. Whoops. Or short-stemmed Russula. So looking on a map, in this area, you see that short-stemmed russulas are found all over the place. I mean, really by all over the place. I'm just looking from in all of these green areas where it's forested and less desert-like. So from the coast all the way out into onto the passes. I don't see a lot over in eastern Washington, and let's just check and see. Mount Hood area seems to be, and Bend, that's about where it seems to cut off, but that's also where people seem to cut off in both Oregon and Washington, or there are a lot fewer people, so just fewer people doing iNaturalist things. So this is a sense on where Russula brevipes is found. The reason why Russula brevipes is interesting is not so much because of it as a mushroom. It's an easy one to identify. You'll see it all over the place, so it's really good to just get it in your mind on what this thing looks like. I like when I'm walking down forest to finally just have names for things that I'm seeing rather than another mushroom that I don't know, another mushroom I don't know. So learning Russula brevipes is a good one because now you just have a very common mushroom that you are familiar with. So some of the things to look for. Oh, let me take a step back. The reason why Russula brevipes is fun to know about is it is the mushroom that creates the lobster mushroom. It gets infected by another fungus, Hypomyces lactiflorum, that turns it orange and turns it into this kind of fishy smelling, fun textured lobster mushroom. So the short-stemmed Russula, this is it's my photo, but it's also just kind of a classic look for the Russula brevipes. It will often have these just big tufts of dirt or debris either on top of it or right next to it. The reason why is the cap forms underground typically or at the surface, and then it just lifts up all of that debris with it rather than a small little pin sticking up out of the ground and then the mushroom expanding. So this is a classic look for Russula brevipes. It's called the short-stalked Russula, and you can see where it gets its name. It does have quite a short stalk. It's a very light-colored, cream or white-colored mushroom. It has a divot in the bottom, which is what helps it hold on to a bunch of dirt on top. So when you see this kind of concave, big, conspicuous white mushroom, you're probably looking at a Russula, and most likely Russula brevipes. But lots of Russulas have this same kind of look to them. Another thing that you will find with Russulas, the whole genus, is that they break cleanly like a piece of chalk. So if you just like broke the tissue or broke the stem, you'd find that it was very brittle, not stringy or soggy. It's crisp. And the common name for Russula brevipae or Russulas in general are is the brittle gills, and that is a great characteristic. They do have very brittle gills. So that's Russula brevipes. With Russulas in general, they all have the same characteristic: break cleanly like an apple or a piece of chalk. Let me just show you Russulas, because they do have a very similar look to them. And let's look at only what Russulas in Washington, just so I can get Pacific Northwest looking Russulas. So really, let's look at a couple of photos, and you can start to just get an idea on what russulas, the whole genus, looks like. Uh, I don't eat these in general, but it's just because I don't know them super well. But what you will notice, they break cleanly, and russulas are considered, all russulas are considered edible if they have a mild flavor. This is what I've read. And it's okay to chew on russulas and spit always. It's pretty much okay to chew and spit all mushrooms, but I'm going to say just russulas for now. So it's okay to, when you find a russula, just chew it and spit. And some russulas you'll find don't really have a flavor at all, so we'll call that mild. Other russulas will have this spicy, peppery flavor to it. So much so that if you chew that mushroom too long in your mouth, it takes a few seconds for that spiciness or pepperiness to come, and you'll be holding on to that in your mouth for a bit of time. So here is another russula photo. I just found these last weekend out on the Olympic Peninsula. You can see the car, just like, this is right next to where I parked. I step out of the car and I saw these guys on the ground. Again, they're big, conspicuous. They will oftentimes have a bunch of dirt on the top of the cap because of just the shape of the cap and the fact that the cap forms underground oftentimes. That's Russula breviipes, but let me show you another couple of russulas in general so that you can see how even these different species can have similar characteristics. They have light colored gills because russulas have light colored spores. So the tissue starts out as light, but some mushrooms have dark colored spores, and so that tissue will become very dark colored as the mushroom matures. You can see on this one that there's a little bit of pink. You can't see it well. There's better photos out there to show this, but there's a little bit of pink on the stem of this one. A lot of times when people find russulas that have this wine-colored cap and a pinkish base to it, they immediately think this is the shrimp russula. So that was the second russula that I wanted to talk about. That is not always the case. Shrimp russulas can have a lot of different characteristics. They can be kind of variable in their appearance, but shrimp russulas will oftentimes have this red or purple wine colored cap and will have some coloring on the stipe, some pinkish reddish coloring on the stipe. When you do find a russula like that, and let's see if I can find shrimp russula. Whoops. Russula, let me go make sure I'm spelling this guy correctly. Just one second. I'm going to show you what the shrimp russula may look like, but I'm not going to trust iNaturalist totally on these observations because you can't know oftentimes unless you're smelling it. So shrimp russulas just look very russula-like with that super cylindrical stipe, but cylindrical stipe, wide-spaced gills, light-colored gills, and then we'll have oftentimes we'll have this kind of purplish. Let me zoom in so that some of you can see that better. A purplish cap, and then ideally you would see some coloring around the base. I don't know that that is a characteristic that must always be there, the coloring around the base, but when people see this mushroom, here's just another characteristic or another version of that same characteristic. It's a russula. It's definitely a russula mushroom, but I think a lot of times people want it to be the shrimp russula because shrimp russulas are edible, and you want to find edible mushrooms. It's just something that we all kind of gravitate towards. We want to force it. With a shrimp russula, it is very useful, and I would say almost essential that it smell like shrimp in order for you to identify it correctly. But generally speaking, mild tasting russulas are considered edible, but for it to be the shrimp russula, it should have that smell of shrimp. So let me get back. I want to look at a couple of other mushrooms that I mentioned I would show you. Chanterelles, I'm going to just skip over because I talk about chanterelles all the time, and if you have been in any of my classes, you've already heard the talk on chanterelles. But let's look at chlorophyllum. Those are the shaggy manes. Genus chlorophyllum. There are 3 genera of chlorophyllum in Washington that I'm familiar with, and there might be one other that is oh yeah, it looks like, let's see where this was found. I'm just going to look at a map and see what we're looking at. Okay, these are chlorophyllum from all over the world. I want to look at just Washington so I can narrow it down some, and forgive me for anybody who's here from Oregon or Vancouver. I just need to filter it in some way. Okay, so now we're just looking at chlorophyllums in Washington. These are the shaggy parasols. They can be confused with the shaggy mane that I was sharing with you earlier, and you can see why. They have that same kind of funny looking cap, but shaggy manes don't open up to a nice planar or disc-like shape, but these shaggy parasols do. That's one difference. Shaggy parasols, the genus chlorophyllum, they also do not auto digest or deliquesce. They don't melt away into that black ink. The key thing to look for once you know that you're looking at something in the genus chlorophyllum, or you're looking at a shaggy parasol, is make sure that the spores are not green. The poisonous shaggy parasol does have green spores. This is a really, really good photo to give you a sense for just the spectrum, or as they age. Like this is a perfect photo. This could be in a book. So you can see how they change as they age. Notice the ring around the stipe here. That is a key identifying characteristic for these guys. That ring can fall away or move around, so it's not always going to be there. But for sure, I mean, until you can identify the shaggy parasols more just by look and not having to worry about spores so much, I would say that as a beginner, it's really helpful just to make sure it doesn't have green spores. The way you do that is you just cut it off, lay it on a piece of paper, and wait for overnight or 24 hours, and you will get a spore print on that piece of paper. The green spored shaggy parasols are not very common in Washington. I don't even know if any have been found, but let's just say they have been. They're just not very common. So it might not be a thing that one needs to pay attention to here in Washington, but knowing that there is a lookalike in the same genus that has green spores and is poisonous, that's probably a good thing to just be aware of. I find these in the cities, these shaggy parasols. I have found them in like Discovery Park. Let me show you a map of where one can find these. It looks like low elevations almost exclusively, but you can see up here a little bit higher at Index, and I'm not sure what area that is, Bandera. So before you get to Snoqualmie Pass, I'm just scrolling south to see. For the most part, it looks like these are more of a city mushroom or a low elevation mushroom, and you're not finding it so much in the mountains. So that's the shaggy parasol, and I mean there are a few different shaggy parasols, but we're just looking to avoid green spored shaggy parasols. And let me see if I can find one more mushroom that we should just look at. Agaricus augustus, also known as the prince. So this guy it's in the agaricus mushrooms. The agaricus mushrooms, they have spores that turn chocolatey brown, or many of the agaricus. I can't say 100% of them do, but from my understanding, most or all of them have very dark colored spores. I'm going to give you some photos to look at. Uh, it kind of just looks like a regular old mushroom, but for mushrooms that can be this large, that can be, have a very large cap, and that have dark colored spores, that starts to be a good indicator that it's worth investigating a bit further. Some of the other more conspicuous mushrooms that are not as maybe you don't care so much about finding are the amanitas, and those have light colored spores, and they might be those bright red ones with the white dots. That's the Amanita muscaria. There are a few other amanitas that are just big conspicuous mushrooms, but they have light colored spores and some other things. This is a big conspicuous mushroom with dark spores. You can see that kind of here, and I may have some better photos for you, but when you look at, you can see the gills here are pretty dark. There's a better photo, I'm sure, so let me go find it. The reason why this mushroom, why I'm bringing this up, is it can have a scent that smells a little bit amaretto or almond like. It is a choice edible, so it's a well-known, wonderful edible mushroom. It does grow in the cities. Let me see if I can get. So you see here, this is a pretty good indication. You see here that on the underside of this cap, the tissue is all still very light colored, but as this mushroom ages, the gills will turn darker colored because of the spores from that this Agaricus augustus. The cap will have, this is a pretty good photo showing what the cap can look like and what you're looking for. So just notice that this texture, or the coloring with these very fine kind of fibrils or lines on here, this is really one of the key identifying characteristics for Agaricus augustus. So older specimens will have dark colored spores, or they all have dark colored spores. Older specimens will have dark gills because those spores have been released. The texture on the cap is a great identifying characteristic. And let's see if we have any on the stipe as well. There's some texture on the stipe that might be useful, but that almond smell is among the best or unmistakable characteristics to find. Here's a nice photo of the underside of this Agaricus augustus. So you can see some texture on the stipe. There is this veil, it's called a partial veil, that used to be covering the gills and then falls away as the cap opens up. And the smell of this, you should be, I think it's smelling the base of the mushroom. You might get that almond smell. But for me, when I'm smelling mushrooms, I'm typically like smelling the gills. I don't recall where the best place to smell these guys are, but look for that almond smell. You would be able to get a lot of help when you find mushrooms like the Agaricus augustus. You'd be able to get some pretty instant help on like the Facebook board. Pacific Northwest Mushroom Identification Forum is a good one. Also Pacific Northwest Mushroom Social Club. If you posted photos, these photos there, I think you'd get some pretty quick identifiers, people who are really familiar with this mushroom and could help out pretty quickly. But I'd just say when you find that texture, that smell is unmistakable when you get it, and just some of these other characteristics that we talk about, that is Agaricus augustus. So I think that really does it for me today. Let me know, feel free to drop me an email if you would like to cover some similar things. I plan on doing this probably weekly. I don't know that it will always be on Fridays or always be at 7, but it works out pretty well for me. And I think it's nice for those who happen to be awake and moving and have some time at this time to hang out and chat. So yeah, please do come back, and I will post a replay of this on in that spreadsheet so that you all can check that out, and anybody else who hasn't been able to is able to as well. So enjoy the rest of your day, and enjoy some of this fresh air that is coming our way. See ya.